The Pearl Coast, the land of grace. The encounter that set the Atlantic world in motion. In our previous episode, we explored the extraordinary marine environment that made Cubagua possible. The Orinoco River, the northeast trade winds, the Charagato Basin, and the shallow oyster banks that produced one of the richest pearl fisheries in history. But the sea does not offer its treasures to those who do not know how to find them. Before a single Spanish ship appeared on that horizon, the people of the Pearl Coast had already been there for thousands of years. On the morning of July 31st, 1498, Christopher Columbus entered a narrow, violent strait between the island of Trinidad and the South American mainland. He named it the Boca del Serpent, the Serpent's Mouth. The passage was treacherous. Opposing currents, the great freshwater outflow of the Orinoco pressing outward against the salt sea, battered his ships and alarmed his crew. Columbus himself was in poor health. Weeks of insomnia had damaged his eyesight. He could barely see. He dictated his observations rather than writing them himself. But what awaited him on the other side of the Serpent's Mouth would change the world. The Gulf of Paria, the wide, calm body of water enclosed between Trinidad and the South American mainland, was warm, green, and alive. And the people who inhabited its shores showed no fear of the strangers arriving in tall ships. On August 5th, Columbus and his captains landed on the Paria Peninsula. It was the first time a European had set foot on the South American mainland. That landing site still exists. Today it is a small, quiet fishing village called Macuro, tucked at the far tip of the Paria Peninsula, facing the same waters Columbus crossed more than 5 centuries ago. A road did not reach it until the year 2000. Even now, most people arrive by boat. The bay is calm, the fishing nets still dry in the sun. In many ways, not much has changed. At the center of the village stands a plaza. Not a Plaza Bolivar, as found in virtually every other town in Venezuela. A Plaza Cristobal Colón. It is, as far as anyone knows, the only one of its kind in the country. The people they encountered on that shore wore pearls. They referred to them as tenocas. Bartolomé de las Casas, who preserved Columbus's own words in his Historia de las Indias, recorded the admiral's observation directly. Traían al pescuezo collar de perlas, y entre ellas venían algunas muy gordas. They wore around their necks collars of pearls, and among them were some very large ones. Columbus sent men ahead to barter. They returned with enough to confirm what he had suspected. He wrote to Ferdinand and Isabella, describing these lands as among the richest he had ever encountered. He called the Gulf of Paria, Tierra de Gracia, the land of grace. He described its beauty so fervently that he believed he had arrived at the very threshold of the earthly paradise. The pearls Columbus found were not the product of chance. They were the product of a people who had lived in intimate relationship with these waters for thousands of years. The Guayquerí, whose name translates roughly as the people of the water, were the indigenous inhabitants of the islands and coastline of what is now northeastern Venezuela. They were not primarily farmers. They were fishermen, navigators, and maritime traders of exceptional skill. They knew where the oyster beds lay. They knew the seasonal rhythms of the sea. They had developed over generations an understanding of these waters that no arriving European would ever fully grasp. Archaeology confirms that the first human settlement on Cubagua dates to around 2325 BCE, more than 4,000 years before a European ship appeared on that horizon. The island the Guayquerí called Charagato flat, waterless, seemingly barren, had been theirs across countless generations. When Columbus's men came ashore, the Guayquerí met them with openness. They traded pearls willingly, accepting the glass beads and painted fragments of Valencian earthenware the Europeans offered. There was, in those first encounters, a quality of genuine reciprocity. Some among them believed the pale-skinned strangers might be sons of the sun, arriving from a world beyond the sea. They welcomed them accordingly. It was a generosity that would cost them everything. In the years that followed, the Spanish would give a single name to this geographic region, from the eastern tip of the Paria Peninsula at Macuro, westward along the coast past the city of Cumaná, and across the waters to the Araya Peninsula and the islands of Cubagua, Coche, and Margarita. They called it the Pearl Coast. On August 15, 1498, sailing westward along the northern coast of Paria, Columbus sighted two islands in the distance. One he named Margarita, the Latin word for pearl. The other was the small, flat island the Guayquerí called Charagato. Columbus noted it. He observed pearl diving activity in the surrounding waters. And then he sailed on. He was ill. Provisions were running low. The Spanish colony on Hispaniola was in revolt and pulling him northwest. He had seen the greatest pearl fishery in the world. He had bartered for its pearls. He had written to his monarchs about the extraordinary abundance of these waters. And he sailed away without fully grasping what he was leaving behind. He would never return. And because he never set foot on Cubagua itself, the Spanish crown used that absence against him. The Capitulaciones de Santa Fe, the agreement he had signed with Ferdinand and Isabella before his first voyage, had promised Columbus a tenth of all revenues from the lands he discovered. His diezmo, his tenth. The pearl beds of Cubagua would eventually produce wealth beyond calculation. Columbus never saw a single coin of it. But others would. Pedro Alonso Niño had sailed with Columbus himself, the pilot of the Santa Maria during the very first voyage of 1492. In 1499, less than a year after Columbus departed these waters, Niño returned. He visited Margarita, Coche, and Cubagua, trading trinkets for pearls. When he arrived back in Spain in April 1500, his ship carried 96 pounds of natural pearls, the first truly profitable return from the New World after nearly 8 years of exploration. Not gold, not spices, pearls. The island the Guayquerí called Charagato would be renamed by the Spanish the Isla de las Perlas, the Island of Pearls. Within 2 years, the first European settlement in Venezuela would be established on its shores. Within a decade, it would become the most productive pearl fishery in the history of the Atlantic world. But that transformation did not happen peacefully. Who came after Columbus, and how quickly did the Spanish return? What happened when the full weight of the colonial enterprise descended on the Guayquerí and the waters they had tended for 4,000 years? In our next episode, we turn to the Pearl Rush, the explosive, brutal, and extraordinarily profitable years that followed Columbus's departure and transformed a barren island into the wealthiest pearl operation in the history of the Americas. To explore additional research, images, and historical resources, visit thecolumbuspearls.com. Thank you for listening.